we are talking about um, microaggression. We're putting a name on that thing that we all can describe, but we're just not sure what to call it. And as Black women, we've all encountered some form of microaggression. And I can say for me personally that I've struggled to find the appropriate or the white way to respond. And I mean, how do you tell your HR representative that you're feeling or experiencing microaggression? Welcome to the Only Male Cruise Show, the podcast. I am the Only Male Cruise. Copyright disclaimer regarding fair use is in full effect. The views and opinions expressed in this show are all mine. Let's go. Okay, welcome to the Only Male Cruise Show, the podcast. I am the Only Male Cruise. We've got a diverse topic for you today. Special guest on the panel today is Dr. Ann Kimball Hill, who is, Ann, I'm going to let you go ahead and give us your title because it's a lot. It's a lot. We also have content contributor Antoinette and content contributor Island Browning. And today we are talking about microaggression. We're putting a name on that thing that we all can describe, but we're just not sure what to call it. And as Black women, we've all encountered some form of microaggression. And I can say for me personally that I've struggled to find the appropriate or the white way to respond. And I mean, how do you tell your HR representative that you're feeling or experiencing microaggression, especially if the HR rep is white or is unwilling to acknowledge that microaggression even exists? So that's the topic for today's episode. It's a Black thing. Do you want to understand? Let's talk about it, ladies. So welcome everybody. How you guys doing today?
Good.
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. So
Great.
good deal. So, I was on IG this morning and I saw a post from, I don't know if you guys follow this man or not, Stephen J. Thurston. And he may not necessarily have been talking about what we're talking about today, but this sure was appropriate. And his post says, "You're not lazy, unmotivated, or stuck. After years of living your life in survival mode, you are exhausted. There's a difference." And I agree with that as far as it relates to Black women and the struggle and the plight that we have to go through on so many levels in so many areas of our life just in one day. What do y'all think about that?
So one of the important things that you brought up by saying as Black women to start with is that we not only have the struggle of being African American and what those challenges come with, but then we're dually affected by being a woman and having the issues that are being a woman. And then you combine that together and then now you're talking about the intersectionality of issues of being a Black woman and all the stereotypes that go with that and all of the ways that we're perceived based off of that. So it's exhausting to not just have to deal with being a Black person, but being a woman. And now you're a Black woman putting it all together. That's totally exhausting.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
I was just going to say that I feel like in the workforce that Black women especially have to be like 10 times more, diligent and on their grind in order to even be considered at the same level of their white counterparts. I do notice that my supervisor is a Black woman and she is constantly overworking to the point that it has affected her health. And she doesn't even get the same sometimes recognition as her white counterparts. And I'm like, this lady is doing way more than her white counterparts. I don't understand. But I do feel like Black women in general, I have noticed, have to do extra to even be considered to be on the same level as their white counterparts.
Yeah, and that's very true. And as far as microaggressions, I think like policies like that are put in place because they understand that, our biggest strength as well as our biggest weakness is our emotions, and all the things that we have to deal with, just being Black, and then being amongst other ethnic groups that know our plight and really don't care. They they d- they use microaggressions as a tool to play off our emotions and use that as a weapon to undermine us, and as well keep us from progressing in the workforce.
I agree with that, Antoinette. And actually, um, I've got here where microaggressions are defined as brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults to marginalized individuals or groups. And, when I said earlier coming into the show that, these, until I started trying to figure out, well, what happened is I reached out to Dr. Ann Kimball Hill and said, hey, look, can you do this show with me? Because I want to know, how can we go to our white employers and tell them, hey, I need to talk to you about this? How do we begin that conversation? And I didn't know that there was a title to it. So now that we're able to actually assign a name to this thing, it seems like, like you can identify, or for me, I can identify, oh man, that was a microaggression. That was a microaggression. It's taking me, and I think it'll take us and people that have already researched this topic a step closer to being able to discuss it. The only problem I have with this microaggression thing is that, how come as Black women why can't we just be that single group that's being worked on to have the issues resolved? Why are we always grouped in with other people of color? And it seems like we still, even when they group us in, we still end up being the ones at the bottom of the bucket before help reaches us. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Do you guys understand what I'm saying there?
I do. And I think part of it is oftentimes in our different work environments, we are the only. And that's a big part when you're talking about having a critical mass where you have a voice that's amplified by others with similar experiences and backgrounds to be able to be heard by the majority is important, because if you don't have that critical mass of people there speaking the same language, the same voice, the same message, it's really easy for that majority group to other you and to discount what you're bringing to the table. So having, when you're the only, it just puts a different pressure on, and that's why we oftentimes do get lumped in with other groups to kind of find this critical mass where you can have somewhat of it changes the power dynamic in that environment a little bit more when you have more than one person that's speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm all for diversity and
Mm-hmm.
having, a mixture of ethnic groups, because you know, allows you to understand other people's backgrounds and other people's points of view. But I'm all for not being the only. Like, I refuse to work anywhere, live anywhere where I'm the only. Like, we almost set ourselves up to be targeted when we are the only, when we live in neighborhoods where we're the only, when we work somewhere where we're the only. Like, we kind of set ourselves up to be targeted for things that are used to undermine us, like microaggressions. And that's really being biased. Like, what may offend me may not necessarily defend you, Dr. Ann, or Island, or Mel. You know, they use that as a tool to target us because they find something offensive that we might not, as Black people, find offensive. And a way to, come to a boss and have, or HR, and have those conversations is first, document things.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in situations where I felt like it was some racism around me. So I'm a component. I use it to be petty too, with my coworkers. I've always done it. I make a sheet and I put the date, the name, the time, and what was said on the spreadsheet. And then once it gets to a certain amount, then I use that as a tool to, have that conversation. Because as a Black person or a person of color, if you have that conversation, the first thing they're going to ask you is, where's the proof?
Okay.
So making sure that you write those things down and write every instance that's down. Okay, I have my proof. And then you just have to make sure that you're not targeted afterwards. Because even though, retaliation is against the law, they still use those things. But
It's
there's
true.
things that we can control. They'll use your attendance as a way of retaliation. And then attendance is something that you can get fired from and they don't have to pay any unemployment for. So if, someone does decide to bring racism or undermining, as awareness to HR, your boss, you just have to make sure that you're that type of worker where they can't use, the law to retaliate against you and get you fired.
Yeah.
And
And
then
then
if it gets too much, just leave. Like, I'm not a fan of staying somewhere where you're super stressed out. Like, you can always find another job if you have another job. So if you get to the point, for me, if I get to the point where I don't want to wake up in the morning and I feel so bad about punching in, it's time for me to look for another job.
that's true. I agree with that. That's my sentiment as well. Because for me, I know that, I'm going to show up. I'm going to give you 120 million%. And, I'm going to go above and beyond just because I think I'm built like that. And, and I'm not saying that I want people to, throw confetti and, have a marching band and all this and that, but don't try to downplay me. You know what I mean? Please don't do that. Because especially by someone who's, you have to prod them and encourage them and motivate them to just get up and do what they showed up late for. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I don't really like office politics. Like, I've always been the type of person where I want my work ethic to show that I'm worthy of a promotion or things like that. Like, I have no desire to like befriend everybody in the workforce. Like, I'm here to do a job and I want to just go home and not think about my job. If it gets to the point where my job is spilling over into my time after I punch out, I have certain things that like I refuse to let a job stress me out. My mother has worked at Blue Cross and Blue Shield like all my life. And she always have brought her work home and said a lot of things. And I've always said, like, okay, so I'm not doing that. And I had a job where I was super stressed out and that's all I thought about was my job. And like you said, Dr. Ann, with someone that like it will make you sick. Stress will make you sick. Overworking will make you sick. And I told myself when I left that job that I would never let another employer or another job get me to that point.
Absolutely.
I think it's also important to realize that when we're saying that we tend to, because we have to prove ourselves, work 10 times harder, even though it may superficially seem like we're not stressing out, the mere fact that we're having that amount of John Henryism, where we're that hardworking person, we're going in there, we're shining based off of their standards, that also takes a toll. We can't underestimate the fact that those long-term, low-level stressors and pushing ourselves that way will do things like raise our cortisol levels. It raises our all of our stress and immune response, which then leads to other things like having health disparities, like getting diabetes, high blood pressure, all of the cancers that affect Black communities that have health disparities. We have a higher death rates. It's all linked to the fact that we have built up these immune systems that have been so stressed out that our body is constantly reacting, and it's termed John Henryism. I don't know if it's kind of a white old fashioned storyline, but it was John Henry was a hardworking man. He was driving steel as hard as he can. But that John Henry died of a heart attack at the end of the story. And so we have to be conscientious that when we are trying to live up to these mantras of we have to work so much harder, that it has these slow effects on us. And I've even seen it for myself where it shows up as, developing autoimmune diseases. So, developing psoriasis and eczema and all of these other issues, they are so linked to my heart rate being higher than it should be when I'm at work because I'm trying so hard and have all these environmental stressors around it. So we can't discount the low-lying constant stressors that we're having as well.
Well, let me ask you this question, and so as far as like, so if we realize that, if we recognize that, everything you just said, okay, I'm under a lot of stress, but I'm shining, but I'm under a lot of stress. I'm under this John Henryism. What can we do? Can we, what can we do? Can we go to our HR rep and be like, look, I'm tired of y'all John Henry and me? Or, I mean, how do you bring that to your employer?
I
Just that,
think I
yeah,
think what Antoinette was saying is important, documenting what it is we're actually doing. Because oftentimes our managers, bosses, they really don't have a faintest clue of all of the things that we're actually doing to shine in the way that they see us show up. Um, Many of our other majority, when we talk about white males particularly, they're able to show up in these spaces and slide through and not put half the effort that we put in. So we have to make it evident what kind of time and effort and energy it takes to show up the way we do.
mhm.
But I also think it's very important to have clear evaluation criteria and really go back and say, look, what am I really being evaluated on? Because sometimes we put all this extra effort into, putting a program or a presentation or whatever on, and that's not even what they're going to take into account when they're talking about end of the year review, right? It'll be simple things like Antoinette was talking about, how many days that you showed up, right?
Mhm.
Which is counterintuitive because if you're putting all this energy in, you're stressing yourself out, you're getting sick all the time. What are you going to do? You're going to miss a lot of days of work.
This is true. This is true.
So
Let
I
me
think the first step is that documentation thing, just like Antoinette was talking about.
mhm. Let me switch gears real quick, and I know we can all identify with this one. Um, Tone. Um, and this is actually not the screen, but since it's up, we'll just go ahead and move into this one. Racial microaggressions are constant stings and barbs. They negatively impact job satisfaction, self-esteem, mental health issues of your Black employees. They can also impact physical health, and that pretty much backs up exactly what you were saying, Anne. But moving on to tone. Now, this is one that as Black women, if there's a Black woman on this panel that has not ever been told anything about their tone, then I need to hear how y'all talking to these people because it's crazy. Tone policing is used as a tool to silence women, particularly Black women, who express any sort of emotion or passion. Has anyone on this panel ever been told or had a conversation from their employer about their tone, other than me? Anyone?
Oh, I definitely have.
Tell us
And when
about.
I notice that when I speak, especially if I'm trying to explain something and I have facts to back up something or I have an example, all of a sudden I'll get, well, why are you so aggressive? What's
Hmm.
wrong with you? And that irritates myself. It really does because I'm not being aggressive. I'm standing firm in what I'm saying. I'm not cussing. I'm not, going off off on you or anything. Like I'm explaining myself and letting you know, like this is what it is. And once I hear, why are you being so aggressive, or I just, I immediately just shut down. Like I can't even talk no more because it's like, okay, you're trying to flip this into, this is the quote unquote, which would it be, talking to this little old me, this innocent person. And I don't, I, I feel like that's something that's common, and it just grinds my gears.
And to me, how do you respond to that? How do you respond? And I think, how do you respond to that? Well, your tone is a little, and for me, if someone told me that in the middle of a conversation, then they'd probably get the tone they're trying to describe that I wasn't giving them. You understand what I mean? So how do we as Black women, how do we respond when we hear that, whether it's, during the conversation or, weeks, days, months after a conversation? When I talked to you last month, a few people felt that your tone, what's our comeback, y'all? Especially if we're being professional and we're not using that slang, or we're not using, curse words, foul language, etc. How do we respond to someone doing this tone policing?
Well, I'm a firm believer it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Mhm.
So, a lot of times, especially when I'm at work, I'm very mindful of how I talk and I purposely smile. That keeps me from getting too overly aggressive. So I smile as I'm talking, but I make sure that, like I'm doing it now, like I smile when I'm talking and it makes my tone softer. And I feel like it's very frustrating at first, especially when you're very angry or you may want to really get your point across. Um, but if you're having a serious conversation, then, it's necessary for the person to hear you. And for me, I don't want my tone or my aggression to keep them from getting the point that I'm trying to make.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of extra things that we have to do, but I mean, it's just one of those things that we have to deal with when we're working around other ethnic groups.
Yeah. You know what? That's a perfect segue into this snippet that I want to share with us. So this is well, we'll see it when it pops up on the screen. But these two ladies are talking about tone police, and the guest, her name is Donna, is explaining her point of view on that. So let's check this out real quick, y'all.
Even on the smaller scale, it's when you're in a room and you're having conversation and people call you aggressive, or they say like, could we maybe let's think about how we word things, because I think people need to understand that we as a community, specifically as a Black woman who is intersectionally erased from conversations about, in the Black community, and then feminist conversations, because we get into the whole white feminism thing. When we're in these spaces with our communities, oftentimes it's like, well, okay, you can talk about this thing, but I don't want to. Like when I was in college, there were issues in our Black community because a lot of the Black women in our community started talking about assault within the Black community. And there were people who were saying, no, we shouldn't be talking about that. We need to just focus on the community and build up the community. We don't need to hear about that. Stop talking about that. Be quiet. Because that's not what we need to focus on. Right. And it's in those feminist spaces where it's like, well, let's just focus on all women. Like we don't,
yeah.
And there might not even be anything that's specifically wrong with quote unquote your tone. It's just that they don't even necessarily want to hear the content that you're sharing.
I find myself very often in rooms where I'm the only person who looks like me in a variety of ways, or has the identities that I do, whether it's being Black or being queer, being a woman, all of these different things. I'm also gender fluid, all of these different things in the conversation. And I've learned how to take up space, which I have no problem with. But along with that, my consonants get very clear and I'm not apologetic for it. Right. And I often run into these issues that people who are like, well, even the allies, like you were saying, who say like, well, like what Donna's trying to say is, or like, wait, Donna, I want to hear you. Please just calm down. Or like, your energy right now is really toxic. It's too much. My favorite are like, and I love and light. Love and light. If you do things with an open heart, like people will really come to you because you catch more flies with honey. Like actually you catch the most flies with raw meat. Let's be real honest right now. Okay? I choose the words I use. Right. And I do so mindful of the rooms that I'm in. And so for someone to immediately skim past all of that hard work that I have done in order to, diminish me, to erase me, to silence me, you're going to catch the verbal hands.
What do you guys think about that?
I can say there's a few things going on. First of all, the insult, right, which is based and steeped into these stereotypes that they're drawing in, right? when they're saying angry Black woman, which only is a moniker that gets put on Black women. That's the first thing we want to make sure we are actually addressing. And then the second part of that is the invalidation that goes with it. Because it's basically saying, because you are an angry Black woman, I can invalidate everything that has come out of your mouth, right? Regardless if it's steeped in fact, whatever, it's coloring everything that perceiving and negating everything that you're saying. So one of the things I would suggest is thinking about cognitive reinterpretation, which is a style of completely addressing and making the other person aware that this is what they're doing and just calling it out for what it is. Name it, claim it, right? That same thought of you need to actually tell people this is what that is, and that is what you are doing. Instead of letting people just slide under, just thinking, oh, I'm going to be your little ally. If you're going to take up the space and be present and really address these things, you have to actually confront things for what they are and really speak it to the name of what it is.
So do you do that in the middle of the conversation? If someone has said, hey, your tone, can you just calm down? Can you just, kind of, just your energy, like this, like Donna said on the clip, your energy right now is a little intense. Can you just kind of like dial it back just a little bit? Should we respond? Should we say something? And if so, what do we say?
I think it really depends on the situation, right? So if this is a one-on-one, right, where this is someone that's coming to you, quote unquote, trying to help, okay, then that is definitely someone, if you can take it from the quote unquote nice space of saying, I know that you're really trying to be my ally in this situation, but you may not realize that you've actually put this trope on me by bringing this conversation this way. So maybe we should try to reframe it. So yes, I think that that's an appropriate time to deal with it head on. Now, I also realize that if you're in a large group and you're the only, then that's a whole different energy dynamic that might require taking a beat and getting some other reinforcements if you're not as comfortable dealing with it. But sometimes you do have to be the one sticking your neck out and calling a spade, right? But it's all going to be based on what you feel comfortable with dealing with the ramifications of, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And
that's a big part of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's like, for me, I like to use the sandwich effect, where you say something good, then say something negative, and then reinforce it with something good. So like it kind of takes the blow off of it, and then it comes to it. Someone may present it or they receive it in a different type of way if you're not hitting them with all the negative. So if you're talking about something that something that may be bothering you, always try to start it off with a positive light first, then address the issue, and then reinforce it, like with the intent on getting a resolution for it, or being open to someone else's opinion on what to do about the situation. That helps a lot, especially like when I'm at work and dealing with other people at work, is instead of just addressing a problem head on, then I use the sandwich effect. And that's sort of almost like you were saying, Dr. Ann.
So what if you're in a situation and, no one has said, oh, your tone, or no one has, you're the only one. No one has said to you your tone, but you've seen all these microaggressions. Can we jump in and say, pardon me, that seems a little microaggressive? I mean, how do we, instead of us just like we've been doing, like a lot of Black women have been doing, where we just suffer through the entire, just say like if we're all on a Zoom call or something like that, and all these microaggressions are flying all around, and everybody's happy with it because none of those microaggressions are hitting them, but they're hitting you squarely in the head. Can we jump in? Is it appropriate to jump in and say, could we just kind of dial this back a little bit? Because I can't take it too much more of these microaggressions. How do we do that?
Well, if for me, like I haven't had the situation, but I had a coworker that did. And, my suggestion to that coworker is if you got to the point where you got that aggressive or someone told you to watch your tone, then you just remove yourself and ask, can you have a conversation offline with the person that, suggested or made the statement that you were aggressive? And then in the offline conversation, state the reason why maybe your tone was a little offensive to them, apologize for it, tell them the reason why you were like that, but still stay on the subject, because there are reasons why someone would feel like they need to get aggressive. Like what made me emotional was dot dot dot, you know? And for that situation, like she didn't listen to me and she ended up quitting before she was about to get fired. But like sometimes we have to watch our tone, because it's not necessarily fair to everybody if you're overly aggressive. And
Okay.
that's like not really expressing how you feel in the beginning. Like I don't let things fester for me. Like
Mhm.
it's even when I first see something that I know may be a problem in the future, then I try to address it head on. And addressing things head on will prevent you from being overly aggressive, because you let things fester and you let things pile up, and then you just explode when you should address a situation in the beginning. Like she was overworked, and they were piling more work on top of the work she was always already doing. She's in a house with a toddler, and it was already hard for her to work on with the toddler and doing her regular job. And then they were piling things on top of that, and if she would have addressed it in the beginning and said, hey, I have, and then mental health is very important with our company. Like they had like given us free counseling services and everything. And
Mhm.
I told her, like, you should use it. As soon as that email dropped, I'm like, girl, you need to put your name on that list. And then once you do that, they know that at this point you're overwhelmed. And then they wouldn't be piling extra work on top of her. And she didn't. She just let it pile, let it pile, let it pile. And then she waited till she got on a big conference call with
Ooh.
CEO, CFO, the owner, and just snap. I'm like, oh, no, she did not do that. Oh my God. I was trying to call her like, no, no, girl,
Oh,
girl.
wow.
I'm like, yeah, you need to call me ASAP. I'm like, because you should have, all of this could have been prevented. You
Mhm.
let all these things pile on top of you, and then you just blew up in front of everybody, and it was so unnecessary. And then she was missing days and she was late, and they used that as an opportunity to start writing her up where she had to quit or she was going to be fired,
Right.
But addressing things head on definitely helps too.
And I also throw in there too that sometimes it's not even being overwhelmed. Sometimes it's just the presence and thoughtfulness that you're bringing that um, it's almost like they're putting you in your place in some ways.
Mhm.
Um, I can bring up a scenario of I also have an academic appointment at a university where I run a program and we do interviews of these students to get into this program. And I'm the only Black woman at the table. And I'm being very conscientious because this is a program designed to select and improve the chances of underrepresented students getting into graduate programs. So I'm very intentional and thoughtful in my questioning and thinking about what is it this student is going to bring to the table? How am I going to help them? Are they really ready for this transition? But I was told initially that when I was in this interviewing process of interviewing these students, that I come across as being intimidating.
That's the word.
So, that's not necessarily a tone thing, because the reality is the same way that I'm asking questions and I'm being thoughtful and I'm responding and I have my set of questions, just like they teach you and all the other HR things that you should be doing to make sure you're having an equitable experience for everyone. But I was the one that was told that my tone was intimidating,
Mm.
right? Um, Now the reality is I have been in the steps that these underrepresented students are trying to get in. So
Mhm.
I'm more aware of all the hurdles that they're going to have to cross. I'm more aware of the perceptions that they're going to have when they're in these training environments. So I'm going to be keen. My questions are going to be much more direct because I know what they have up against them.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't. But that was kind of invalidated because you picked on my tone as saying I'm intimidating versus thinking about she's really trying to make sure we're getting the best of this crop so that we're successful in helping them be successful in getting where they need to go. So
And it
this
really
tone thing
comes
is
from,
used many ways.
yeah, and it's used to be biased because you could say the same thing that another ethnic group could say, and then it would be offensive when you say it versus if that same thing was said, the same tone and everything was said from another ethnic group, it wouldn't be considered offensive. It would be considered assertive, and all these positive uh,
Mm.
ways you can come across in speaking to someone. And that's just something that we have to deal with, and it's just so unfortunate.
Yeah, it's it's definitely a struggle. It's definitely a struggle. And just like in that clip we just saw where, the girl Donna was saying that, I just did all this hard work. It's like our brains have to process one situation in multiple, on multiple levels through multiple facets just to make a statement. Okay, there's a white man in the room. There's a five white ladies in the room, and I have to say this, this, da, 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 and then also respond timely so that it appears that you're present in the conversation. And then all they have to do is just come up with those, that one cliched statement, oh, your tone, or something of that nature that just throws you all the way back. Now you got to regroup and go through that entire process again to respond to the microaggression they just spewed, and it has taken you off the topic. And I don't think that I don't think that people understand it. I don't think that white people understand that that's what we have to endure. So Black women have dealt with the angry stereotype for years, enforced by a white privileged agenda to stamp out their voices and keep them quiet. Often labeled aggressive or over assertive, Black female professionals are regularly subjected to tone policing, a silencing tactic used by oppressors throughout history. Um, it's to me that is enough it's proof that this is an ongoing thing. I think it's what do we call the biases? What are those biases called? Inherent biases. That mindset of um, just immediately anything that we might say assertively, if it ruffles the feathers of uh, those in attendance or within earshot, they are able to use this. Oh, you sound angry. Well, oh well, you're just like that's really aggressive on your part. Can you dial that back? It's inherent, and I don't even know if when they use that statement, are they even at that point? Are they even trying to be? Are they trying to microaggression you, or is it just so inherent that they don't even realize it? Nylan, look like you're getting ready to chime in.
Yes, I have been through a circumstance where at work there was a young white lady who would take a lot of breaks. She'd go on smoke breaks. She'd go sun tanning during working hours and all that stuff.
Goodness.
Somebody was watching her do this and reported it back to our supervisor at that time. She thought it was me because I was standing outside in the parking lot when she went out to one of her, I guess,
Escapades.
out right. And when my supervisor informed her that, you have been caught going out, this, she assumed it was me and she called me the B word. And I said to her, don't you ever in your life call me out my name. And do you know, they said I was the aggressor.
Oh Lord, have mercy.
And all she got was wrote up. She wasn't suspended, nothing. And
They
that's the type of stuff that was my first time ever having to deal with those type of things. You know, you hear about it,
Mm-hmm.
but I had never experienced that where somebody has called me out my name in our workplace, disrespected me, yet I'm the one that's the aggressor because I firmly told her, don't you ever in your life call me out my name.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I looked at the world very much differently after that,
Mm.
especially in the workforce, because it's just like, wow. So basically, she could say anything to me,
Right.
but because I firmly said to her, do not disrespect me, I now am the aggressor. How is that? I'll never understand.
And if the tables were turned, you probably would have been fired.
I would have been put on the street for a week without pay.
Mm.
She didn't get anything. She didn't get nothing. We even had evaluations that time, and she got money.
Mm.
And I'm like, ain't conduct in our evaluation?
Come on.
Definitely is.
What is this about?
Right. And so,
After that, I kind of I would not, after that, I did not speak to her anymore. And she would run to other people and be like, Janella won't talk to me, Janella. Yes, I won't talk to you because you will never get me in that place again. And I don't trust you.
right.
And simply it's because of who you are. Now I see who you are and what you can get away with. I don't want no parts of it.
Yeah, I worked somewhere where we had two different floors. And so I was doing collections on the phone, collecting. It was a loan company, and the compliance was on another floor. So all the back office things like support tickets, compliance related issues, monitoring calls, and things like that was on another floor. Now, most of the people that were on the phone were Black and Hispanic, and then most of the people that were in the compliance department were white. It got to the point where there were about to be a lot of changes within the company where they were going to get rid of a lot of the people on the phone and move that position to somewhere south where it was cheaper. And so they knew that ahead of time. So it got to the point where they put everybody on one floor. Someone wrote on a board. We had like big boards where you can, like chalkboards where you can leave notes in meetings. Someone put up there, welcome to the jungle. So I was on my way to the bathroom and I took that picture because that day that someone wrote welcome to the jungle was the day that all the compliance people were moving on the floor with us. So I said, oh, now someone could spin it and say that that's based off of a song, but welcome to the jungle is because now most of the white and Hispanic people have to mingle in with all the Black people. I find that highly convenient, and that looks like something that needs to be addressed. So I took a picture of that, and I was like a week later, I was on the elevator, and it was mainly white people on the elevator, and I was in the corner. Like when I would get in the elevator, I would just be in the corner. So as people pile in, I'm so short, you didn't really see me. So someone asked the coworker, "Oh, you headed to the 17th floor?" He was like, "No, I'm going to 18." With attitude, he was like, "Oh, well, you going to the jungle?" Everybody laughed. Somebody turned around and seen me, and then his smile dropped. I purposely went through my whole directory to find everybody in that elevator because then it was time for me to address. I printed up the picture of what I of that board, and then I also found everybody that was in the elevator, and then I went to HR with that information. Then all of a sudden, all these emails start coming about diversity and all these things, and being mindful of who's around us. Yes, you have to be mindful of who's around you. And, for that reason, I think that even if I give grievances on what I feel is going on around me, like they're very careful because they know I still have that information, you know, until I end up leaving. But, it's just something that you have to deal with. And it's unfortunate because if someone Black was heard saying a statement that was racist in the same tone, they would be fired. And everybody that was on that list was still working there.
Well, you know what? That's, it's, and it does. That's really a good description, Antoinette. And it does make one question, because if it were me, and if I were your coworker at that place, and all of a sudden, and say you told me about it, you say, hey Mel, you know what, girl, this and that. And let's say that all of a sudden these emails come out about diversity and, da 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 da. My question is going to be, why are you waiting until an incident happens? Why are you not being proactive in this? And I feel like even now, this is a hot button issue where, this diversity and inclusion, these are keywords that people are using for positive and negative. So actually, I'm going to play this next clip. And in here, Donna is talking about allies. Let's check this out real quick.
I was in a conversation at a wedding. Somebody halfway through, we were talking, oh my God, we were talking about how like very often these movements center Black men over Black women. And this was like before George Floyd and Breonna Taylor a while ago. And in the middle of it, my friend, who I know quite well for 20 years, like, hold on. I just want us all to stop for a second and just take a breath. These are some radical ideas we're talking about right now. And it's really important that we keep having the conversations. So let's go ahead and just put our best self forward so other people can respond as their best selves. And she whispered it. I've not spoken to that girl since.
Wow. Did you have a conversation after, or it's just since you just haven't? Like, was there a discussion about it after she did that?
There was not.
Well, sometimes there don't need to be.
Right. And maybe that's my bad. Maybe I should have, but I wasn't being paid to teach that day, and right. I was already the only Black person at this wedding. And I'm like, how do you live in Los Angeles and you ain't got not one other Black friend? That's a choice. That's a whole different conversation.
That is a choice. And
I'm already feeling vulnerable, right? And it depends. If some days I feel like teaching, some days I want to go off. Some days I ignore you. I don't know. It depends, because we're not monoliths either. We're people.
That's right. It's not our job. We're not walking around as people's magical Negroes, do answering everything and educating and putting in all of that emotional labor. But it is like very true. There's sometimes I'm more willing, or I have more bandwidth and energy to really engage and dive in, and I'll go back and forth.
I mean, it's tone policing, and then I think on a more serious level, it has to do with like things that the predominant culture doesn't understand and they deem foreign in this melting pot that I like, and more often than not, they don't have access to, which again is a whole different conversation about culture vultures and all of that, but they don't have access to it, right, in a natural sense. And so it's not, now I must vilify this, but also I'm vilifying this idea I have of the angry Black woman, which is not what you're being presented with. I think I'm really quite likable. I think I'm quite amenable. Not. But you've made me this other thing, and I can't, there's no way I can go around the wall that you've built. I think it often comes up in selecting, in the art world, selecting materials, right? Because you can't come into something without thinking about your target audience. And I, like you, I've sifted through so many plays and loved it. And someone's like, well, it's a little, the characters aren't likable. The lead character isn't likable. She seems so angry, right? Or like, no one's going to relate to this, or the language is really harsh, or that's a lot of N-words. That is also tone policing. Mm-hmm. You look at someone's body of work and you say, well, I couldn't possibly connect to that. That's like saying a man could never possibly connect to a film that starred a woman, because he couldn't. But also, and this is, and I know what I've said counters this, but this is me, responsibility, trying to meet y'all in the middle. You do not have to understand the experience in order to have empathy, in order to champion someone, in order to help them further their cause or help them push past the person. I really should not have to say it's kind of like I'm a human being.
Word. And it sounds to me like this Donna lady is actually having these conversations in real time based on what she said so far in the clips that we've seen. She's actually and that's a courageous move. I'll just have to be honest. It's courageous. Maybe she's, an entrepreneur. She's a business owner, so she can risk. She doesn't have so much to risk, but it sounds to me like that's where we're falling short, in that we are not able to have these upfront conversations about the impact of these microaggressions, these tone policing tactics, whether and you did correct me in the chat, or you educated me in the chat when you called it implicit or unconscious bias. Maybe all of these actions on the part of the other people, maybe it is implicit or unconscious bias. But the fact is that it sounds like Donna is having the conversations. She's ruffling the feathers. Whereas I think a lot of us aren't, and maybe because we don't know how to do it. But I like the idea of doing it in real time, saying it in real time, getting these people used to it in real time, that, hey, wait, because they don't hesitate to stop us and say, well, could we just, kind of like settle down, everyone, calm down, you guys. They don't say it directly to you, but you're the last person, or they interrupted you while you're speaking. It's like, can we just calm down? You know what I mean? So my objective in our show today is to find the dialogue that we can use to actually address it in real time. And the example that she gave about the woman whispering it, like, what? Does anybody feel what I'm saying here?
Like for me, like the biggest problem I have for me is the fact that, when it comes to the things that Black people go through, this underlining, or like Dr. Ann said, it's more implicit, rather than unconscious. Like if they want to tap or tiptoe around the subject at hand instead of dealing with it head on, because it would give they would be forced to have a level of accountability in situations like that. So instead of addressing things head on, they want to tiptoe around it, and they want you to tiptoe around it as well. And like for us, we don't tiptoe around things. We want to deal with situations head on, and that's something that they're not willing to do. So then instead of them doing that, then they try to act like we're crazy or it's not there. They don't want to address the elephant in the room, because they really don't want some things to change. They
Right.
want us to stay in our place. They want us to be able to work through different type of environments. They want to be able to say anything that they would like to say, and then we have to be mindful of our tone. That's the environment that they really want us to be in, like the good old days in the 50s, before things changed and civil rights changed. They want to go back to that, where we stayed in our place, and then they can say and do what they want. And anytime someone challenges that, then we are left to mind our tone. And that's another reason why I say that I don't like being just the only. Like I would rather live and work in spaces where I'm not the only one. I know for a lot of different career paths, it's hard to do that, especially the higher up you go. But, it's just something that you have to deal with. But if you choose to go up, then Black people in general have to have a certain level of emotional intelligence. Um, and that takes time, because you will have to heal some traumas in order to have a certain level of emotional intelligence. I remember, like James Baldwin said, to be Black in America and to be conscious is to really be enraged all the time. Because the more you are aware of what's going on around you, and then you understand the history, it keeps you angry. So how could you change your tone and monitor your tone when you're frustrated and angry with all the things that's going on around you every day being Black?
Absolutely. So let's. Oh, go ahead, Dr.
So,
Ann.
so Antoinette brought up a really important point, and this is the inherent problem with just talking about diversity by itself. Diversity is oftentimes used just to say, well, I've got percentages, or I've got quota of different people from different categories in my organization. But it doesn't speak to having differences of perspectives. Oftentimes they want us in the room, but they want us to sit in a specific role where we only are able to exhibit the same majority characteristic that the majority has, right, from their social group has. And that sets us up for failure, for thinking about inclusion in equitable situations. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that while we were focused on some of the superficial issues that were happening during the Trump era, there were some real things that were happening to cut down the civil rights advances legally. And that's one of the reasons why it's really important that we pay attention to why people are not wanting to pass the Civil Rights Act and why they're stacking these judges in certain positions, because they're legally changing how we can approach some of these problems. And one of the biggest examples of this is a court case that just went before the Supreme Court, Collier versus Dallas County Hospital, where the issue was that the employee was exposed to the N-word often in that space, and he was saying it was a hostile work environment based on this. And the question is what circumstances will racial epithets in the workplace be considered extremely serious enough to actually deem it as a hostile workplace environment, instead of just inactionable mere utterances that we just need to basically shrug off. The Supreme Court has been stacked up by the Trump era, full of conservatives that don't want to touch these issues because they like the status quo, and they're trying to reverse a lot of the improvements that we've made. And they turned down hearing this case, which basically said, you're on your own and you have to deal with this, and it's legal then to have these type of hostile work environments now. That's basically the way it's going to play out. So we have to really pay attention. It's not just how we're dealing with these situations in the workplace. It's also the laws that are being affected. I mean, one of the last things that Trump did as an executive order was to put out an order that removed trainings because it was making certain people, certain backgrounds, when you start talking about privilege, uncomfortable, right? And so then it makes it difficult for you to even talk about naming these issues as for what they are and dealing with them and addressing them from an HR perspective, because they've changed the laws. I think Joe Biden has done an executive order to try to reverse that. But the point is that there are certain groups that are actively trying to keep us in these spaces and actively trying to remove our voice. So we have to pay attention in a much broader sense.
So let me ask you this then, Ann. So that person that you described in the case, if they've come down and just made the decision or it hasn't been decided yet, but if at this point it's okay for him to be exposed to the N-word because, well, just shrug it off, sticks and stones can break your bones and words never hurt you, then in order for us to fight back, should he come back with his own little, descriptors of how he perceives that individual? So if they call him an N-word, can he call him I don't even know what they call. Can he use a racial descriptor on him, a negative racial descriptor on him? Like, can he call him the grand wizard, or even though some might take that as a compliment? But can we fight back that way? Because at this point, it's like, well, just keep suffering through. And so we're still exposed to all of the things that we mentioned at the beginning of this program. We're taking it. It's building our stress. Our blood pressure's high. Our autoimmune disease is cropping up. We're having all these issues because we're still just taking it. And laws are either not being passed or complied with, where they can still come in and call us N-words. The incident that Island described, they can call us the B word. So I want to know, how do we fight back? What can we do right now? Because to just continue to sit through and allow it is problematic for me. What do we do?
Well, I'm not saying that we should just sit back and just sit through it. That's never my advice. I think that I was very right in addressing the issue. And there are real consequences, like she described, with these workplaces being so hostile, where we do get the retribution and the consequences of standing up for our rights, basically. But what I am saying, that while we may have to take the hits, that we have to also be progressive in thinking beyond just what's happening in our day to day, and put the pressure on these systems to change the rules. Whether that means, really putting the pressure on Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act so we are more protected in these scenarios, because right now they're leaving us with gaping holes in these spaces. And until those gaping holes are filled, it removes a lot of our legal options to deal with these situations.
Yeah, and to add to your point, Dr. Ann, I feel like we are so focused on presidential elections that we need to normalize the conversations of the smaller ones, like our mayor, our House of Representatives, our Congress people. All those people play an important role in the things that affect our day-to-day lives, the things that are in our specific state and different laws that are in our specific state. And if we focus more on that, that can help change things too. Having the president is good in certain aspects or bad, but also, the people who are in charge of things on a ground level are judges. If you're in larger cities, your aldermen and things like that. All those people play an important role on the different laws that are in our workforce and in our neighborhoods.
I was just gonna say, not only like how Antoinette was saying, where you have written statements or you have evidence to back up claims, but it is also important that what I've come to witness, I guess where sometimes with our people is, oh well, it's not me, so I'm not saying nothing, or I'm not going to have your back, or I'm not affected by it. That's your problem. I think people don't realize strength is in numbers, and sometimes when you have people supporting and backing you, those changes can occur and things can start moving in a progressive direction. It's hard to fight by yourself. So it's like, if you see somebody that's being disrespected or constantly mistreated, or there's some sort of microaggression, I feel like as co-worker, as well as a fellow, human being, say something, have, like I said, just strength is in numbers.
So, okay, ladies. So, and I put this in the chat. Here's what I want us to be able to do before we wrap up. I want us to, because I agree with everything everybody said, and it's going to take everything that everybody said. In certain circumstances, it is going to take, like what you had to do. Hey, girl, let me let you know something. Don't ever in your life call me out my name. It's going to take something like that in real time. Like you said, Dr. Ann Kimball Hill, the political aspect of it, and the government and the laws and this and that, which I don't even know if those things will be changed by the time we're all 100 years old, so I'm wanting us to find a way or find some verbiage that if someone is saying something that we deem inappropriate, or we deem as a microaggression, or we deem as tone policing, what are some things we can say immediately to bring it to their attention at that time? You guys understand what I'm saying? You understand what I'm trying to get out of you? I don't know. I'm hoping I explained it well.
I do. So there is some literature and work out there talking about micro intervention strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to think about, number one, is it an individual perpetrator that's doing the aggression? Is it institutional, so it's more macroaggression, or is it more of a societal macroaggression? But if it's an individual, what's usually suggested is, number one, to make the invisible visible. So whether that's undermining the communication by really, making that communication explicit, like what I think you're saying is, or what you have really communicated by saying this, or challenging the stereotype, or broadening the trait that they're trying to ascribe just to, like, being angry Black female, to being more of a universal behavior. Like, well, I think it's appropriate for anyone in that has been attacked in this way to defend themselves. That's just human behavior, to defend yourself. Asking for clarification. I think that when you said this, that you meant this, or it came across as this. Now, is that what you really were trying to say? And that gives you the space to now really engage in a way to disarm the aggression and educate the perpetrator.
But is it?
But I do think educating the perpetrator isn't always what that person wants, but it's more about disarming the aggression. And the other thing is, it's more about a protection thing of yourself as well, because when we talked about the health impacts and all that kind of stuff, it's because we internalize it and we don't claim our power in those scenarios. So those are the general strategies that are thought, and also thinking about what kind of external help that we might need. So is it going to authorities? Is it making sure we get therapy to deal with these issues? So I think that there's some general strategies, and maybe we can talk about how to apply them. But those are the general thoughts that have been said and how to address these things.
Well, let me ask this question, because I got to take the kids to softball, one to gymnastics, and the other one to skating, and I can't fit therapy in my calendar right now. I got so much going on, I can't do all that and add therapy. So, like, even using, and that's example. But even using the situation that Island described, which really is a great case, it really hits home to what I'm talking about here. It's because would it have been appropriate for her to have said, so let me make sure I understand you, supervisor. It's okay for her to call me a B word. And is that what you're saying? Because that's what I'm understanding with this conversation. You're telling me that it's appropriate, even acceptable, for me to be referred to as a B word. Am I hearing you right? Because that's paraphrasing it back to the person you're having the conversation with. Is that okay to do? Can we do that? I know it's risky, because they might say, just get out of here, you're fired. But can we be that courageous? Should we be that courageous in those type of situations?
I think you should also throw in there, is it okay with her to verbally assault me by calling me the B word? We've got to put that power on that. Is it okay to verbally assault me in this workplace by calling me that B word?
Mm-hmm. Because I feel like if we come back in real time, because like Antoinette, and you laid out some really good foundational information here about, documenting everything. And so I feel like if in a conversation like what Island had, because we know that supervisor is going to push that up the scale. If Island would have said, so, you're saying that it's okay for me to be verbally assaulted, then I just want to be clear. That supervisor would have pushed that on up the scale and said, oh yeah, we need to have a talk with Island, put her on an IEP or something of that nature. But I feel like if we respond, then when it is pushed up and they read it, and they'll say, well, the girl came in and called so-and-so a B word, and you attempted to write so-and-so up. And what was her response? Well, she asked me because at least now they understand the perspective that we are viewing their conversation on, even to the point where the supervisor may not even choose to escalate it, because she now understands, oh, I see it from your point of view. I see how you could interpret that. You understand what I mean? Y'all help me out here.
Is it that you're asking, like, when you don't have the, I guess, the time or the means to kind of work through things, how to handle it within that exact moment. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and not even necessarily the time island, but just the fact that we know we have to start being proactive. We have to be proactive on this topic, you know. And so in real time, because we've made a commitment to be proactive in this topic, because we know what microaggressions are now, we've been dealing with them our entire existence. So yes, in the real time situation, when they say, hey, well, you know, I'm going to have to write you up because in the meeting, when Tom said that, you know, he was the best at this and nobody else in here could do it, even though, you know, you've been doing this job. And your response was this and that. So I'm saying, paraphrasing it back to them and calling them out at that time in real time.
Yeah, so like when you like with Island situation,
Mhm.
she brung it up to her manager and then give them time to see if something gets done. And if not, then call a meeting and ask to speak with all parties involved. Like I would want to be in the room with her and talk about what went on and give her an opportunity to be accountable for what she did. And then at that time, if nothing was done, then I would like to take this step further. Like a lot of times we express how we feel and then we just let it go. But you got to think about you said, Island, we have to look out for each other. I'm not only speaking up just for me, but I'm speaking up for someone else that may be faced with the same situation
Right.
with the same person. So to
Right.
keep her from thinking just because she knows she can't play with me like that, she might try to do that to someone else. Let me make sure that everyone understands that this type of behavior is not acceptable.
Mhm.
Right. And the thing that I know that I definitely failed at was I could have went to the union
Mm.
and I didn't go
Mhm.
because I felt like it was just me against all these people because
Mhm.
the director got involved, my supervisor got involved. Even the girl's mother
Mm.
got involved and did sympathy tears
Oh
for the
no.
director to, and I was by myself, you know, I didn't have the support. And I think if I had went to the union though,
Mhm.
I think the matter would have been settled in a way that would have worked out strongly in my favor.
Mhm.
That is my only regret with that. And I would say to anybody, it doesn't matter if the argument is little and small, if you're disrespected or your intelligence or your um the way you handle yourself is you know met with disrespect
Mhm.
or met with some type of stereotype,
Mhm. Microaggression. Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
go somewhere to see if you can get some sort of backing or assistance with human resources so that the matter can be settled, because it's like when you put your foot down and you actually go and do the work and go up the chain to say, hey, this is wrong, them companies don't want no problems,
They do not.
because problems is money,
Right.
Yep.
is them losing money.
Yep.
And so not only are they going to try to, pacify you with maybe some financial reward or put you in a new position,
Mhm.
they're going to also change the rules in their rule book so that
Mhm.
is not tolerated. So that the next person that does that, oh, you out on the street.
Yeah, and it sets a tone for everyone else. Just like when, I was talking about someone was bold enough to put "Welcome to the Jungle" on
Mhm.
that chalkboard. I told my boss, but I wasn't. My whole objective was only to let my boss know what I was going to do,
Mhm.
because my intentions was not just to talk to the boss. I wanted to talk to HR, and I wanted everyone in higher up positions to know what I saw, even though by the time they investigated, it was gone. Of course, it was.
Sure.
But I have the picture though. So
Right.
you can't deny the picture that I took with the timestamp that I printed up and I showed you, and I had a list of everybody who thought it was funny. So that's when we start having these diversity inclusion emails and all these different things that started coming out. And before then, those type of conversations weren't being addressed on a company level.
Okay.
And I feel like that's important.
Yes.
When we are out in the workforce, we are not only representing ourselves and our family, but we're representing everyone, especially when we're a minority. Where
Mhm.
I work, it's maybe like 30% of us are Black, but I know everything that I do within this company represents everyone because it may be someone's first time working
Thank you.
around someone Black. And
Right.
on top of what they see on television or what they see in media, they already have in the back of their mind what they perceive a Black woman or a Black man to be. So, me being the best version of myself when I'm out in public, may change someone's mind on what they thought a Black person was. I've had a few white people tell me that. Like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought all Black people were lazy. Oh, really? Oh, where did you come up with that idea? Because now
Yeah.
I know you need to do some reading and you need to do some research because we are not all lazy. That is not what it is in real life in real time. But we do have to address, for everyone else and take it a step further and to prevent other things from happening and progressing to get worse. We have to
Right.
work to make things better.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. And it takes courage.
There was something else that was brought up that I think we oftentimes don't do. When you're taking the time to log and send these emails to document what has actually been happening, we need to also go back and coach our issue within the framework of that organization's stated core values or their limits, right? Because then you put them on the defensive, like, this is not living up to the values that we said we wanted this organization to have and represent to the public. So now what are you going to do?
Good point. Good
We don't
point.
oftentimes take that legal stance of using their own words against them and how they're going to deal with the situation.
Right. Like every company has about us and what our motivations are and what this company is about. And you're right, Dr. Allen, you do have to use that. Like, this is not the environment that, you said that, that this is what you guys are striving for. So, how we're going to fix things to make sure we're living up to this company standard for everybody.
Mm-hmm. That really is that was key right there. That was clutch, Dr. Ann Kimball Hill. Because yes, that's solid. Because I can see how that would put them on the defense, and especially when, this company's been in existence since so on and so forth. The policy handbook was written, 5 years ago, updated just recently, and it says all of those things. So yeah, is page 22, paragraph 8 says this, that, and 2/3. Well, this is activity that I endured or I encountered, observed, and this is totally opposite of what the handbook says is acceptable workplace behavior, et cetera, et cetera. So I like that. I like the fact that you have given us, I like the fact that what you suggested is a solid move for us to be able to address an issue. Well, as y'all know, it's about that time. So that's it. That is the podcast. And I do want to thank Island Browning, Antoinette, both content contributors. Special guest today on the panel, Dr. Ann Kimball Hill. I appreciate you guys for, pulling up and just having this conversation. I hope somebody will be empowered by what we said and be able to, continue to think through on how we can start taking control of the situation so we don't have to continue to just suffer through and endure all of these microaggressions and just try to figure out. So I appreciate you guys coming in for the conversation. Be sure to follow me on all social media platforms, The Only Male Cruise. Instagram, Twitter, Station Head, YouTube, Spotify, Anchor FM. Ladies, thanks again, and I hope we can get together very soon. So until next time, we will see ya when we see ya.